I remember the day vividly, etched in my mind like a scar that refuses to heal. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that makes everything feel heavier, as if the world itself was mourning. I had just returned from yet another doctor's appointment, exhausted and frail from the treatments that had become my new normal. My body was still weak, but my spirit had been fighting. I had fought for my health, for my life, and for my marriage. Little did I know, I was about to lose everything I thought I was fighting for. It started innocently enough. I was lying on the couch, the muted sounds of the television in the background, when I noticed my wife's phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up, and for a split second, I thought about ignoring it. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship, and I had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. But curiosity gnawed at me, a little voice whispering that I should check it. When I picked up the phone, my heart raced, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of dread. I swiped to unlock it, the same code we had always shared. My hands trembled as I navigated to her messages. What I found was a thread of conversations that shattered me. Words of affection, inside jokes and plans that didn't include me. The name of another man echoed in my mind like a cruel taunt. I felt the air leave my lungs, my heart pounding furiously against my chest, an animal desperate to escape. Betrayal is too soft a word for what I felt. I was engulfed in a storm of emotions, each wave crashing harder than the last: rage, sadness, disbelief. My mind raced back to the times I had been there for her, the late nights I had spent comforting her through her own struggles. I had been her rock, and yet here I was, a mere afterthought in her life. How could she do this to me while I was sick? I dropped the phone as if it burned me, my stomach churning. I could feel tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I fought them back. I would not allow her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settle within me. I was not just a victim in this, I was a man wronged, and I would not go down without a fight. I took a deep breath and pushed myself off the couch. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The thought of confronting her made my stomach twist, but I wouldn't allow fear to dictate my actions. I would face her, demand the truth, and reclaim my dignity. As I walked towards our bedroom, the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me like a heavy cloak. I felt a mixture of anger and betrayal boiling beneath the surface, ready to erupt. I could hear her voice in the distance, laughter spilling into the hallway. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her until the truth fell out, but I had to keep my composure. I had to be strategic. The door creaked open, and there she was, the woman I had loved and trusted, sitting on our bed, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. The sight of her felt like a dagger to my heart. How could she look so carefree? I cleared my throat, the words lodged there like a stone. "Can we talk?" I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. She turned to me, her smile faltering as she took in my expression. I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes, but it was too late for that. I was no longer the man she could manipulate with her charm. I was a man scorned, and I was ready to fight back. The air in the room thickened as I stepped inside, my heart pounding like a war drum. I closed the door behind me, locking us in, as if sealing our fates together in this moment. The laughter that had just filled the air evaporated, leaving behind an oppressive silence. I could feel the tension coiling between us, taut and ready to snap. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of worry, but I could see it in her eyes, an underlying fear. She knew something was off. "Not really," I replied, forcing myself to remain calm. "We need to talk about your messages." Her face paled, and for a brief moment I saw panic flicker across her features. It was a small victory, a crack in her facade. I had her right where I wanted her. "What messages?" she asked, but I could hear the tremor in her voice, the way it betrayed her. I took a step closer, my resolve solidifying. "The ones with him, I read them, and I want to know how long this has been going on." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. I could see her mind racing, calculating her next move. I had always known her to be clever, but I had never been more determined. I wasn't going to let her spin this narrative. "Who is he?" I pressed, my voice low but firm. "How could you do this to me while I was fighting for my life, when I needed you the most?" Her expression shifted and I could see the gears turning in her head. "It's not what you think," she began, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. "Then what is it?" I shot back. "What is it that I'm supposed to think? That you've been loyal while I lay in a hospital bed? That you've been my partner while you were with someone else? You have to be kidding me." Her eyes darted away and I could see the guilt washing over her, but instead of breaking down, I felt the anger fueling my next words. "You think I'm going to just let this go? I won't be a victim. You've betrayed me and I deserve to know why." She shifted on the bed, her body language defensive. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was lonely and you were. You were sick. I didn't know how to handle it. Lonely." The word hung in the air between us, a bitter reminder of the isolation I had felt during my illness. "So you chose to cheat. That's your excuse. You could have talked to me, but instead you went looking for comfort in someone else's arms." The anger surged within me, but I fought to keep my voice steady. I needed her to see the weight of her betrayal, the impact of her choices. "You made a decision to be with someone else while I was fighting for my life. I was there for you when you needed support, but you chose to undermine our entire relationship." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen, it just did." The simplicity of her words stung. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I replied, my voice cold. "You've shattered the trust we built, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." "Please," she pleaded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Let's work this out. We can fix this." But I shook my head, feeling a sense of clarity amidst the chaos. "No, we can't. You've made your choice and now I have to make mine." With those words, I turned away, feeling the weight of the moment crash over me. I had confronted her, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the beginning of a war I was determined to win. As I walked out of the room, her cries followed me, but I didn't turn back. I had to keep moving forward to focus on the next steps. I felt a cold, hard resolve taking shape within me. I would not let her betrayal define me. I would outmaneuver her, and I would ensure that she understood the consequences of her actions. I needed a plan. I needed to prepare myself for the battle ahead. The confrontation left me reeling, but it also ignited a fire within me. I wasn't just going to wallow in pain. I was going to take control of my life. My marriage had crumbled, but now I had work to do. I needed to gather my thoughts and strategize. Revenge wasn't just about anger. It was about making calculated decisions that would secure my future. I dove headfirst into research. I spent hours online, poring over divorce laws, reading articles, and joining forums. I wanted to understand every nuance of the legal system. My mind raced with plans, each one more elaborate than the last. I was no longer the sick husband. I was a man on a mission, and I would not let emotions cloud my judgment. I knew I needed a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate the murky waters of divorce. I reached out to a few firms, but I had one particular lawyer in mind, someone recommended by a friend who had gone through a similar ordeal. After a few days, phone calls and emails, I found myself sitting in a small, sterile office, the weight of the world resting on my shoulders. "Mr. Reynolds," the lawyer said, extending a hand. "I'm glad you came in. I understand you're going through a tough time." I shook his hand, the grip firm and reassuring. "Tough doesn't begin to cover it. My wife has been unfaithful while I was sick, and I want to make sure I get what I deserve in this divorce." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "I understand. Infidelity can have significant implications in divorce proceedings, especially when it comes to asset division and alimony." I leaned forward, eager for information. "What can I do to ensure I come out on top? I want to make sure she pays for what she did." The lawyer's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of respect in his gaze. "First, we need to gather evidence. Any texts, emails, or photos that can substantiate your claims will be crucial. We'll also want to document your medical history, showing the impact of your illness on your life and marriage. This will help establish that her actions were a betrayal of trust during a vulnerable time." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I have some of those messages saved. I can get more if needed." "Good," he said, scribbling notes. "We'll also want to assess your assets and debts. It's essential to have a clear picture of your financial situation. If she was unfaithful, we can argue for a more favorable settlement." As we discussed the details, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was now directed towards a goal. I envisioned myself standing in the courtroom, armed with evidence and a solid strategy, ready to confront my wife one last time. After our meeting, I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. I saved texts, screenshots, and even started documenting my medical journey, the doctor's notes, treatment plans, and everything that illustrated my struggle. I wanted to paint a picture of the man she had betrayed, the partner who had stood by her side. I consulted with my lawyer regularly, refining our strategy. Each conversation fueled my resolve. I was no longer the passive participant in my life. I was taking control, and it felt empowering. I was determined to ensure that she faced the consequences of her actions, but it wasn't just about revenge. I began to think about my future, about what life would look like post-divorce. I wanted to rebuild, to find solace in a new beginning. I realized that I needed to come out of this stronger, not just financially but emotionally. I had to let go of the pain and betrayal, but first, I needed to secure my footing. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a sense of purpose returning to my life. The anger transformed into a focused determination. I was ready for the battle ahead, ready to face my wife in court. I could see it clearly, the moment when I would stand before the judge, armed with evidence of her betrayal, ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. The thought sent a thrill through me. I was no longer just a victim of infidelity. I was a man seeking justice. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination coursing through my veins. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to put everything into action. The courtroom loomed before me, its imposing structure filled with the echoes of countless stories, each one a testament to the complexities of love and betrayal. I arrived early, dressed in a crisp suit that felt like armor against the emotional storm that awaited me. The air was thick with tension as I took a seat in the waiting area, glancing around at the other couples awaiting their fate. I could see the fear on some faces, the resignation on others. But I was different. I was ready to fight. When my lawyer arrived, we exchanged a nod of solidarity. "Remember, stick to the facts," he reminded me. "Keep your emotions in check. This is about securing your future." I nodded, but inside my heart was racing. I thought of the betrayal, the pain, and the anger that had fueled my resolve. I had to channel that energy into my testimony to ensure that the judge understood the full impact of my wife's infidelity. Finally, my name was called, and I stood, following my lawyer into the courtroom. The judge sat at the front, a stern figure behind a towering bench. The room was filled with the rustling of papers and the low murmur of conversations, but as I took my seat, everything else faded away. The proceedings began, and my wife entered the room, her demeanor calm but her eyes betraying her anxiety. She sat across from me, and for a fleeting moment I felt a pang of sorrow for what we had lost, but I quickly pushed that thought aside. This was not the time for weakness. As the judge called for the first witness, I listened intently as my lawyer laid out the facts. He spoke of my medical struggles, the treatments I had undergone, and the emotional toll it had taken on me. I could see the judge taking notes, and I felt a flicker of hope. This was my chance to show that my wife's actions had consequences. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stood up, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. I recounted the events leading up to my discovery of the affair, the pain of betrayal, and the impact it had on my life. I spoke clearly and passionately, determined to convey the depth of my feelings without letting anger cloud my judgment. "I supported her through my illness," I said, my voice steady. "I was there for her when she needed me, and in return she chose to betray my trust. I don't believe it's fair for her to walk away unscathed." As I spoke, I noticed my wife's expression change. The confidence she had walked in with began to waver. I could see the guilt and shame creeping into her features. It was a small victory, but it was enough to fuel my determination. My lawyer then presented the evidence, texts, messages, and documentation of my medical condition. Each piece painted a clearer picture of the betrayal I had endured. I could see the judge's brow furrowing as he absorbed the information. When my wife's lawyer began cross-examining me, I felt a surge of adrenaline. They tried to poke holes in my story to paint me as an unreliable witness, but I stood firm. I countered their questions with facts, my voice unwavering. I was no longer the sick husband. I was a man reclaiming his power. At one point, her lawyer asked, "Isn't it true that your illness put a strain on your marriage, that perhaps your wife felt neglected?" I met their gaze unflinching. Strain doesn't justify betrayal. I was fighting for my life, and instead of supporting me, she chose to seek comfort elsewhere. That's not neglect, that's a conscious choice. The room fell silent, and I could feel my wife's eyes on me, a mixture of anger and regret flashing across her face. I was ready to fight for what I deserved, and I could see that my words were having an impact. As the proceedings continued, I could feel the tide turning in my favor. The judge seemed to resonate with my story, his expression softening as he listened. I knew that I was making my case, and it felt empowering. After hours of testimonies and arguments, we finally reached the closing statements. My lawyer summarized the evidence and emphasized the emotional impact of my wife's infidelity, urging the judge to consider the circumstances surrounding our marriage. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had faced my wife, confronted the pain, and fought for my future. The battle was not yet over, but I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had taken control of my narrative, and no matter the outcome, I knew I had stood up for myself. The days following the divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of emotions. I had poured everything into that courtroom, and now I was left with a mix of anticipation and dread as I awaited the judge's decision. Each morning felt like a test of my resolve, the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had fought hard for my future, but the finality of it all left me feeling vulnerable. While I waited, I threw myself into my work. I needed to distract myself from the emotional fallout of the divorce and the lingering bitterness of betrayal. I focused on projects that had been neglected during my illness, immersing myself in the tasks at hand. It was a welcome distraction, but I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. As the days turned into weeks, I found solace in the small things: my morning coffee, the quiet moments spent reading, and the gradual return of my health. I was still recovering physically, but emotionally I felt a shift. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was learning to reclaim my life, but the truth of it all still hung heavily in the air. I found myself reflecting on my marriage, on the love I had once shared with my wife. It was hard to reconcile the memories of laughter and companionship with the reality of her infidelity. I had supported her through thick and thin, and yet she had chosen to abandon me when I needed her most. The betrayal cut deeply, but I was determined to rise above it. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my favorite cafe, I received a call from my lawyer. My heart raced as I answered, the anticipation palpable. "The judge has made a ruling," he said, his tone serious. "I think you'll be pleased with the outcome." I held my breath, waiting for the details. The judge had ruled in my favor, acknowledging the emotional distress caused by my wife's infidelity and the impact it had on my life. The settlement was substantial, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had stood up for myself, and it had paid off. But even with the victory, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. I had fought for my dignity, but the reality was that my life had been irrevocably altered. I was no longer part of a partnership. I was alone, navigating a new path. In the weeks that followed, I began to find a sense of closure. I started to clear out the remnants of our life together: photos, mementos, and anything that served as a reminder of what had been. Each item I packed away felt like a small release of the pain I had carried. I was no longer defined by my marriage. I was reclaiming my identity. I also began to reconnect with friends and family, those who had supported me during my illness. I had isolated myself during my struggle, but now I sought their company, their laughter, and their love. I realized that I didn't have to go through this alone. I had a network of people who cared for me, who wanted to see me thrive. As I moved forward, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had faced my demons, confronted my wife, and fought for my future. The experience had changed me, but I was determined to emerge stronger. I started to explore new interests: taking up hobbies I had neglected during my marriage. I found joy in painting, in writing, and in discovering who I was outside of a relationship. Yet there were moments when the pain resurfaced, often catching me off guard. I would see a couple laughing together or hear a song that reminded me of my wife, and for a brief moment I would feel the weight of the loss. But instead of succumbing to the sadness, I learned to acknowledge it, to let it wash over me without letting it drown me. I realized that healing was not linear. It was a journey filled with ups and downs. But each day I chose to move forward. I chose to embrace the uncertainty of the future, to let go of the past, and to focus on building a life that was authentically mine. The divorce had been a painful chapter in my life, but it was just that, a chapter. I was ready to turn the page and write a new story, one filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. As I sit here reflecting on the journey I've taken over the past months, I can't help but marvel at the transformation. From the depths of betrayal and heartbreak to a place of healing and empowerment, I've navigated a tumultuous path that has reshaped my understanding of love, trust, and myself. The finality of the divorce brought a bittersweet sense of closure. I had fought for my dignity, secured a favorable settlement, and emerged from the experience with a renewed sense of self. But it was not just about winning. It was about reclaiming my life and my worth. I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for, capable of rising from the ashes of betrayal and starting anew. The days following the divorce were filled with both challenges and triumphs. I learned to embrace solitude, finding strength in my independence. I began to explore new avenues in my life, from pursuing hobbies I had long neglected to reconnecting with friends and family who had stood by me during my illness. I found joy in the little things, morning walks, quiet evenings, and the thrill of discovering new passions. I also took time to reflect on what I wanted in a future relationship. I realized that trust and communication are the cornerstones of any partnership, and I was determined not to settle for anything less than I deserved. I had experienced the depths of betrayal, and I knew I wanted to build a life with someone who valued honesty and loyalty. In the months that followed, I began to dip my toes into the dating world again. It wasn't easy. The scars of my past still lingered, and vulnerability felt like a daunting task. But I approached it with a newfound perspective, understanding that every relationship carried its own risks and rewards. I was no longer the man defined by his marriage. I was a man reborn, ready to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. As I reflect on the journey, I've come to understand that healing is not a destination but a continuous process. There are moments when memories of my wife surface, and I feel a flicker of sadness. But instead of allowing that sadness to overwhelm me, I've learned to acknowledge it, to honor the lessons learned, and to focus on the future. Ultimately, I've realized that I can't change the past, but I can shape my future. I've emerged from the darkness with a sense of clarity and purpose. I am learning to trust again, to open myself up to love, and to embrace the uncertainty of what lies ahead. This experience has taught me valuable lessons about resilience, strength, and the importance of self-worth. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own needs and happiness. I've learned that betrayal can break you, but it can also be a catalyst for growth. As I close this chapter of my life, I do so with a heart that is both scarred and strengthened. I'm ready to embrace whatever comes next, armed with the knowledge that I am capable of overcoming even the most difficult of circumstances. In the end, I have learned that life is a series of choices, and that each day presents an opportunity for renewal. I choose to move forward, to seek joy, and to love fiercely, knowing that I am worthy of a future filled with trust and happiness. The journey may have been painful, but it has led me to a place of empowerment and self-discovery. I am ready to write the next chapter of my life, one where I am in control, where I am the hero of my own story, and where love is something I embrace with open arms. And with that, I step into the future, ready to face whatever comes my way.